Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I'm your host, the voice of reason. So in this video, we are going to look at the military situation inside of Tigray and why exactly did the Tigray Defense Forces, the regional defense forces, this is again not a fully autonomous professional military force, but more of a regional type militia with some heavy combat capability, with some very limited heavy combat capability. But by and large, it is a footborne or truckborne infantry force designed to operate locally and protect the Tigray region. Originally, it was to augment the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. And that force comprised of up to 250,000 men. Now, again, these are not full-time soldiers. These are a lot of these are simply names on rolls that Tigray felt that it could call upon in a time of conflict to raise said forces. The reality is probably in the neighborhood of about 50,000 active Tigray defense forces. So what caused the TDF, and I'm going to call the forces responsible for the Tigray region that are operating on the Tigray side, the TDF. So what caused these forces to withdraw from large cities such as Mekelle, Adigrat, Axum, and other towns that would probably run along the north of Tigray and then head south to Mekelle? Well, the biggest issue is the composition of forces that the TDF was facing. So if you look at the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, and a lot of this information is drawn upon some fairly reputable sources such as the International Institute for Strategic Studies. That compiles a database of world armies and force structure. So the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, at the time the hostilities started, consisted of one, a special operations command that had been traditionally called the Ghazi Division. I'm not certain if it is still called that, but again, this is a commando special forces division that is broken up into two brigades, and then it has what it would define itself maybe as a Tier 1 special operations type of group in another unit that consists of about 400 personnel. So these are highly trained, rather competent soldiers that have seen extensive action all across Ethiopia, to include Somalia, the border with Sudan, the border with South Sudan, and then obviously historical engagements with Eritrea. Next is the Northern Corps, which consisted of one mechanized division and four infantry divisions. And this Northern Corps was hampered immensely by a preemptive strike by the TDF. And at the same time, when I say division, an Ethiopian division is about a brigade-sized element, anywhere from 5 to 7,000 soldiers. Next is the Western Corps, with one mechanized division and 3 infantry divisions. One Central Corps with one mechanized division and 5 infantry divisions. And then the Eastern Corps, which consists of one mechanized division and 5 infantry divisions. And these mechanized divisions contain most of the heavy equipment in the Ethiopian military, and I'll talk about that now. So at the start of hostilities, Ethiopia probably had in the neighborhood of about 460 main battle tanks, possibly more or less. And then we're not certain of how many of these were actually operational. And that breakdown consisted of 246 T-55s, T-62 models, and then another 200 plus T-72s. And in many cases, these T-72s have reactive armor as well. They have reconnaissance armored vehicles, estimated 100 BRDM-1s. That's a light armored vehicle with a heavy machine gun. Approximately 20 BMP-1s. Armored personnel carriers, they have approximately 300, most of which are BTR-60, some BTR-152s, Type 92s. And then the area where Ethiopia is fairly proficient in terms of equipment, in terms of quantity, is artillery. So Ethiopia possesses quite possibly up to 600 guns, many of which are the Delta 30 122 millimeter gun, and it is believed that Ethiopia possesses over 400 of those. And then they also utilize the BM-21 Grad rocket launcher, and they probably have over 50 of those. They also have a host of heavy air defense cannons. Many of those have been adapted for the use on trucks and a direct ground attack role. And then the Ethiopian Air Force possesses the Su-27 fighter bomber, possibly up to 12, and then depending on how many are actually serviceable, it could be half of that. They also possess the MiG-21 MF, and they use that in a ground attack role. And then there's a host of other light training aircraft that can also be used in a ground attack role as well. So that was a fairly sizable force that the TDF had to deal with in terms of heavy firepower that the Ethiopian military could bring in from other parts of Ethiopia once the Northern Corps had become temporarily handicapped. So the biggest issue at hand really came from Eritrea and the size of the force that Eritrea was able to bring to bear against the Tigray region. So Eritrea usually has a standing army of about 200,000 men, and it can fluctuate either greater or lesser depending on national needs. And obviously, given the preparation that was made for the invasion of Tigray, we believe that the Eritrean forces may have been up to 250,000. Not actual forces entering Tigray, but the actual Eritrean Defense Forces probably had ballooned to about 250,000 men, if not more. In terms of their structure, it's divided into 19 infantry divisions, a commando division, and they also have a mechanized brigade where a lot of the heavy equipment in the Eritrean military is located. In terms of equipment, Eritrea utilizes about 270 T-54-55s, 40 BRDM-1s and 2s, approximately 15 BMP-1s, and about 35 armored personnel carriers. So again, the Eritrean Defense Force is really an infantry force with that uses its tanks to support the infantry. And a lot of the videos that we are seeing coming out of Tigray, you will see just that. You will usually see a company-sized force of the Eritrean Defense Forces being supported by a single T-55 main battle tank. And then artillery, the Eritrean Defense Forces possess just over 200 pieces of artillery ranging from 122, 152 millimeter, and 130 millimeter. And they also utilize multiple launch rocket systems, 35 of the BM-21 Grads, and they also possess the Uragan, the 220 millimeter Soviet made Uragan, which is a 220 millimeter very large rocket launcher. It also uses air defense guns of the 23 millimeter variety, many of which are utilized on technical type vehicles for a infantry support role. And then the Air Force of Eritrea is MiG-29s, and then possibly Su-27s. I have heard, though, that those Su-27s are no longer operational, and the MiG-29s, and then obviously helicopters serve as the primary ground support role. And then just really quick to backtrack to Ethiopia. Ethiopia also possesses 2 squadrons of Mi-24 Hind Russian gunship as well. And that is a fairly significant platform as well. So it is possible that the TDF, the Tigray region, was facing at least 100,000 strong force that was entering Tigray from 2 directions. So from Eritrea, we believe that there were about 50,000 Eritrean troops that crossed the border into Tigray, and then another 50,000 soldiers, and this is not including the Northern Corps, which eventually was able to reconstitute a bit after the preemptive strike by the TDF, but another 50,000 troops by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. So again, in total, facing 2 fronts, the TDF was facing 100,000 soldiers backed by hundreds of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and heavy artillery, i.e. 122 millimeter variety Grad rocket launchers. And the methodology of the advance was to surround towns. So Alamata and Mekelle and a host of other towns were first surrounded by tanks and infantry, and then artillery guns were then brought up, and the towns were then shelled. And the reason the TDF left a lot of these towns and cities is because they knew that the Eritrean Defense Forces and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces would shell many of these towns into oblivion. They would have turned these towns to rubble if the TDF had conducted large-scale resistance inside of these towns and had fortified these towns. And the TDF, again, largely being made up of people who live in this region, almost 100%, did not want to see its cities destroyed, because they would have to return to these cities to live in these cities, and it would be very difficult to rebuild these cities once they were destroyed. So that is the reason the TDF evacuated, made a strategic decision to leave these towns and so take to the hills, so to speak. And that is what they are doing currently. So the strategy is to try and, one, wait out the Ethiopian and Eritrean Defense Forces, because it takes money, it takes treasure, it takes supply, it takes the loss of life to maintain this large a force inside of Tigray. So the question is how long are Ethiopian fathers and mothers willing to send their sons and daughters into Tigray and face possible death. Not to mention the difficult conditions that the EDF and the ENDF will be operating under. Well, I don't think it matters in terms of the EDF, the Eritrean Defense Forces. They're going to do what Afwerki says, and there's not a lot of options because not a lot of reporting about the conditions of the Eritrean Defense Forces is being authorized or let out to the general public inside of Eritrea. A little bit different in Ethiopia. While it's not widely broadcast in terms of casualties, in terms of the harsh conditions Ethiopian soldiers are enduring in Tigray, word is getting back that it is not a good place to be deployed. And I think, again, that is the goal of the TDF, is a operation of attrition until the EDF just sort of tire of being in place and decide that they in fact may need to leave. The EDF, or the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, seems keen on occupying the large cities and towns, and basically staying in those large cities and towns. The Eritrean Defense Forces uh, seem to be of the opinion that that's not sustainable, and are looking to prosecute a war of annihilation on a lot of these central mountain towns, such as we saw in Samre and Gidget. They are looking to completely destroy the mountain towns and small villages of Tigray. That is their war goal. That is their war aim. It seems to be a war, quite literally, of annihilation for Eritrea. They are looking to just completely burn these towns down and apprehend the local population, and possibly move the populace to other places, possibly even what would be called concentration camps. But that is the kind of the what it looks like currently on the ground right now. Again, a lot of the fighting is taking place in central Tigray, inside the mountain areas where the TDF is operating, and we will keep an eye on the situation and report as news filters in. Again, it's very difficult to get news because it's such an isolated, where the fighting is, it's so isolated, and the Eritrean side gives no news, and the Ethiopian side gives very little news, nor lets very little news out of Tigray as well.